Captain America Brave New World has finally raged into theaters after many reshoots, but is it a brave new direction for Marvel Studios or does it fly directly into a wall with its jetpack thrusters set to high? Stick around and I'll let you know my thoughts. Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Sean Morgan and I love movies. I also love comic books, especially Marvel comic books, which I have not yet really had a chance to talk about very much on this channel. I am a huge comic book nerd, and I'm very primed to be into any comic book adaptation that hits the theaters. The MCU, for example, has been a staple in my life. I've watched it in my childhood and in my young adult life. I watch all MCU things to this day. I've also really always dug the Sam Wilson character in the comics and in the films, as well as characters like Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, as well as a certain other villainous character that appears in this movie, but that I am not sure is public knowledge, so I won't spoil that just yet. I'm a big Marvel head, so I was primed to give this movie a little bit of slack as far as the hubbub, as far as reshoots and rewriting and recasting things of that nature. I'm someone who liked Eternals. I'm maybe one of six people in America who thinks that movie is legitimately good. So I was also kind of thrilled to see the events of that movie actually matter for once. This all being said, while I liked Brave New World on the whole, it is one of the Marvel projects that most wears its problems on its sleeve. The film is directed by Julius Ona, and it stars Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson, Danny Ramirez as Joaquin Torres, and Harrison Ford as Thunderbolt Ross, taking over the role from the late William Hurt. Reshoots are commonplace in most big budgeted films, even ones that come out and end up being amazing have likely been reshot to some degree, but Brave New World is a circumstance where the obvious reshooting and rewriting and reshuffling is a bit of a hindrance to the final product. The entire affair is simply not as tight or thematically hefty as the great MCU entries of days past. All the meaningful character moments, for example, are saved for like the tail end of the film. I'll issue a spoiler warning here because I would like to discuss the movie in its entirety and I don't want to bother talking around cameos and things like that. So this is the spoiler warning right now. Okay. There is a moment, for example, towards the end of the film between President Ross and Liv Tyler's Betty, who returns, and that moment I think genuinely works. The final scene of the movie between Mackie and Danny Ramirez also works, where we learn, why exactly Wilson and Torres connect so well and what they share in common, why, in particular, Torres is inspired by Sam Wilson. That moment really I thought worked phenomenally well, but that connection would have felt more impactful earlier on in the film so that we cared more about Joaquin Torres before he is in severe danger and distress after a particularly uh, gruesome injury during an aerial battle. In addition, there's also a great moment early on between the Isaiah Bradley character, who returns here from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier television series. But then, of course, Bradley gets shipped off to prison for the majority of the film. And, Mackie or Sam Wilson, I should say, and Isaiah Bradley, they don't really get to connect a lot again until the very end of the film. So moments like that, character moments, are what makes these MCU movies feel like more than just franchise entries. There's just to pull even another example, there is a moment in Brave New World between Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes that is basically one of the best things in the entire feature. That scene, even though it's just two guys talking, is all about legacy and the fact that while Steve Rogers was an inspirational, unattainable figure, the thing that sets Sam Wilson apart and makes him unique is that the average person could become him if they wanted to. He is aspirational. He's not a super soldier. And, that moment is fantastic. And I wish we got more things like that throughout the course of the runtime, if I'm being totally honest. The action, to kind of move away from just the kind of character moments, the action is, mostly decent, but it's again marred by the reshoots that were pretty obvious. Punches and hits don't feel quite as impactful as in other certain Captain America adventures, though I will say that I dug the aerial combat and the sort of riffs on things like Top Gun. That whole scene above Celestial Island was pretty fun. I love Red Wing, even though it's not an actual bird here like it is in the comics. I think the ways Sam uses the Red Wing drones are super cool. I love that the shield can kind of like attach itself to the Red Wing drone and act as like kind of a video game protection power up while Sam Wilson flies around the battlefield. That was kind of neat. As far as Sam's technology goes. I don't know if I love the continuous use of this like Wakanda absorption energy technology. It was cool for a while, but we're quickly approaching this territory where it's, slightly overused a little bit. My favorite Black Panther fights on screen are the ones where he, was just using cool hand to hand stuff rather than big purple uh, blasts, for lack of a better term. And it's also unfortunate, speaking of the purple blasts, that the final fight here looks the way it does in some shots. I have no issue with, the actual decision of calling back to Sam Wilson's roots as a counselor and having him talk the Red Hulk down off of the metaphorical ledge. But the volume technology that Disney uses in this particular scene, it just looks terrible. You can sort of forgive something like that if we're meant to be in space, or if we're meant to be in, an alternate sci-fi realm. But people know what Washington D.C. looks like, right? You can't let something like Washington D.C. look like a mishmash of CGI vomit, for lack of a better term. If that is where you're setting the climax of your movie, you need to understand that people know what that looks like. They want it to look like your characters are in a real location and not standing, next to green screens. And there are other scenes like that too. For example, with the other big villain of the movie, which I will now spoil. Excuse me. Um, Tim Blake Nelson returns as the leader, and I like the leader in the comics. I like his like statistics BS, and I didn't even really hate the way that they adapted his comic book look here. I thought it worked fine, but it seemed very odd that there were several scenes where it was so clear that Tim Blake Nelson and Anthony Mackie were on totally separate green screens that were later composited together. I would be fascinated to learn what the original draft of this movie looked like, because I just don't know why it always looked like Tim Blake Nelson was like standing in an entirely separate space from every other character. It really, really became distracting, particularly towards the end of the movie. You know, there's so much that I think will be interesting to delve into once someone leaks what exactly went down on the set of this movie. There are so many of Hulk's like adjacent characters here, but no Bruce Banner appearance, no even like She-Hulk appearance for some reason. And like the Serpent Society are kind of present because they're comic book villains of Captain America, but it's really only like one or two of them, and the other half kind of got cut out of the movie. Like, I'm fairly certain that Rosa Salazar and the wrestler Seth Rollins were set to appear in the film as additional Serpent Society members, but neither of them appears in the finished product whatsoever. And also, like, I don't know, as far as characters go, like supporting characters, why does the movie have two different security advisors to Harrison Ford's President Ross, when that means neither of those security advisors gets enough screen time to really make an impression? I know that in the comics, for example, Sam Wilson pals around with Misty Knight sometimes. I think maybe they could have just brought back that character as a fun nod for Luke Cage fans. You don't even really need to tie it into the Netflix continuity. You can just bring back Simone Missick, I believe is the actress's name. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Bring her back, make her an advisor to the president. By the end of the film, the president abandons the office so she can go back to doing cop stuff in New York City. That's totally fine. It would have been a fun nod to the fans, and it would have actually given you one individual around President Ross to like be a real character, as opposed to splitting that time. And speaking of President Ross, I also think it would have been super cool to, I mean, this is kind of impossible in this day and age, but I do think it would have been cool for the studio to have sat on the Red Hulk reveal as a big surprise instead of marketing the entire movie like, on this one aspect that really only shows up for the finale. I feel like you're kind of setting audiences up to be let down by using it in all of the marketing and then it only being in a very small sliver of the film itself. I'm sure, like I said, it would have been next to impossible to keep that kind of detail from leaking, but the film itself treats it as like a big reveal, even while everyone sitting in the audience already saw Red Hulk on the poster outside in the movie theater lobby. So it's really like a strange decision as far as the marketing goes. And strange, I think, is the word that best describes this movie. No pun intended. I don't mean, Stephen Strange, but just on a macro level, so much of this movie is just like it's odd in terms of the decision making. It seems, a little haphazard as far as these kind of superhero movies go, particularly something like the MCU, which has a pretty sterling reputation on the whole. I know that's fallen off a little bit in recent years, but I am still, pretty much. Um, I don't think there's any that I've outright hated so far. Um, but it's only because I'm such a comic book dweeb that I feel comfortable making all of these criticisms. Um, it's a strange new world, I guess, to be sure. But the film itself is not without the usual default level of Marvel fun. It's not an immediate top tier, Marvel movie, but I'm still perfectly fine with it. It's just frustrating to feel like there was a bolder, more engaging film on the edges of the frame, just waiting to be tapped in at a moment's notice. Like for all of the political implications of a Black Captain America and the kind of allusions you could make for President Ross being a representative of how American politics operates, the movie does not seem interested in engaging with those ideas. And even something like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier series on Disney Plus, while also flawed in its own way, is at least swinging for the fences ideologically. Whereas I don't know that I could say the same for this particular movie. So, where does Captain America Brave New World rank on my scale of A list? Amazing, average, abysmal, or needs to be abolished? I think it's probably average. It's a solid 3-star Marvel movie that, I wish had been better given how much I like a lot of these characters from the comic books. I think this marks the last of these films that were made during the hectic kind of make as many things as possible, no stopping era from Disney. So here's hoping that the ship straightens out a little bit with the Thunderbolts. I have faith. I like that team. I like that trailer. We'll see how that goes. But what did you think of Captain America Brave New World? Let me know where you would rank it in the MCU. I see a lot of people putting it way towards the bottom. I'm not quite sure where I would put it in my overall rankings. There are like 30 something films at this point, I think. And, were you expecting more from this movie? Were you expecting more Red Hulk? Did you even care that they're doing like straight up sequels to The Incredible Hulk from like what, 2008? Most people did not seem to care. But I would love to hear those thoughts. Feel free to like this video or subscribe to the channel, or you can do both of those things. You can do neither of those things, whatever you want. It is a brave new world after all. Feel free to follow me in general for thoughts on new movies as they come out. I will try to post as often as possible when a buzzy new film comes out. Until next time, stay safe and do better, Senator, because Captain America says so. Bye.